All right, Wes Fleming, you are on Driven to Ride. Thank you for being here, sir.
Happy to join you. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, and you were good enough to have me on your wonderful podcast, which we'll get to in a minute, a little bit, but that's how we have connected. Let's just start at the beginning, though. What do people kind of most know you for? What's your claim to fame, as it were?
Well, I think anybody who knows me at this point either knows me from the podcast uh, or through the YouTube channel for the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America, where I post tech videos.
Okay. Well, let's dive into the video part first. Tell me about what you do with those tech videos and what you kind of do with the BMW MOA kind of as a whole.
Sure. Well, a lot of it, I've kind of over my time with the MOA, which has reached 10 years as of, it's still October. So 10 years of as of this month.
Yeah, congrats.
Thank you. I have written a lot of technical articles, a lot of how-tos, a lot of Q&As, some features and stuff like that, but mostly I do the technical stuff. And it comes a lot from I break my motorcycle a lot, or it breaks, or it breaks down, or because I'm one of those people that I'm like kind of the complete opposite of what you might have as a stereotype of a BMW rider.
Okay.
I'm not well off. I have all of my bikes. I've never owned a new motorcycle. So I always buy used. I usually buy from somebody that's crashed or had a problem.
Okay.
So it really, my own problems with my motorcycles has been fodder for all of my tech knowledge, because I'm one of those people that if I can't figure out an obvious way to fix it, then I'll go look it up. And I learned a lot of the things that I needed to know from YouTube. So
Mhm.
it seemed like a way to give back, because when I was coming up, when I first started riding motorcycles, there was no YouTube. The internet was in its infancy, and it wasn't used for things like we use it for today. So
Right. Yeah.
to be able to, I put my clutch job on YouTube, and it's still, even though it's been, I think 2017, so 7 or 8 years,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
still one of the most popular videos that I ever uploaded to the YouTube channel, because it's so dramatic, because you have to literally break the motorcycle in half to get to the clutch.
Right. Right.
So just being able to see the process, I think, helps people. And that motorcycle especially, I had a lot of problems with. So it was constantly broke. It was great from a content perspective, because I always had something to write about. I always had
Right.
something to shoot. In the last several years, though, it's become more working on other people's motorcycles or fielding
Okay.
questions and coming up with ideas for that. And then kind of a little bit, whatever comes into the shop, I team up with a guy called George, who runs a shop called Gridlock Motors in Warrenton, Virginia. A little plug for him there. He only works on BMWs, so it's very
Okay.
convenient for my content needs.
Right.
And he does most of the work that he does is routine maintenance, because that's most of the work that all of us get done on our motorcycles.
Right.
But every now and then I'll get a call and he'll say, "Hey, I've got this," and "Hey, I've got that," and I'll grab my tripod and head on down and learn how to do something else.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, you've got no shortage of content, it sounds like. And it is really weird to hear, like, oh, 2017 isn't that long ago. No, it's like 6, 7 years ago now. And,
Yeah.
but the content still holds up. So that's got to be a nice feather in your cap.
Yeah. And that's I think one of the great things about YouTube is, if if you haven't done it, somebody else has, or has done
Sure.
something
100%.
similar to it and probably posted a video. And, like anything else, some of them are good and some of them aren't. And I can certainly see my first couple of videos were not great, not well edited. Um, and hopefully I've gotten better at that as time goes on. But I also kind of look at it as a little bit of a insight into people's personality. And
Oh, sure.
so, yeah, so I'm not a super tight editor when it comes to those videos because I want people to see that we're having fun and that work doesn't always have to be work. George and I joke with each other and we get along with each other pretty well. And I like for that to come through in the videos as well,
Mhm.
because to me, being able to get a little bit of insight into the personality of the person I'm watching is sometimes as important as the content itself.
Sure. I mean, you kind of have to trust who you're listening to, and it sounds like you kind of show the honest part about putting motorcycles back together and repairing and maintaining them, and that um, not everything is going to fit back together exactly perfectly, or something is going to need a little bit of muscling to fit back in, or you might get confused. I mean, I think there's a lot of honesty and authenticity in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just fun. Yeah, the I have a lot of respect, a lot more respect now for people who actually make movies, you know,
Yeah, I
than I
bet.
used to, just because of the little tiny little sliver of work that I've done in the video industry, and I see how hard it is and how much planning it takes. And to get something like an actual movie made, that just boggles my mind.
Yeah, yeah, same here. But let's go back a little bit to the beginning, to the dawn of the internet, as it were, before you could look up PDFs of shop manuals and YouTube videos. How did you even get into motorcycling in the first place?
I think from I don't want to say from childhood, but certainly from no, it's got to be from childhood because I had an uncle, my mom's youngest brother,
Hmm.
was a thrill seeker. So he was a dirt bike racer, he was a snowmobile racer, and he was also a drummer. And he was the coolest person I knew when I was a little kid. And so I kind of paid attention to him. I didn't become a drummer because, I'm not a monster, but
You're not a complete
hi-
psychopath.
that's right. I don't know exactly why he was interested in racing dirt bikes. Actually never talked to him about it,
Hmm.
but that mental picture stuck with me. And when I was 7 years old, we moved from the United States to Germany.
Oh.
And I have a very clear memory of sitting in the back seat. My father had already been in Germany for a year. The military was weird back then. You couldn't take
Hmm.
your family overseas with you until you'd been gone for a year.
Hmm.
Um, and he picked us up at the airport in Frankfurt, Germany, in this back then was West Germany, in this just rattle trap Mercedes. I mean, it was a janky car. I'm not gonna lie to you about that. Um, but I remember because I was the oldest of the three boys, I kind of had prime window seat,
Right. Yeah.
and I remember sitting in the back seat of the car, looking out the window, a little bit of a gray day, no clue what life had in store for me. I'd just been taken away from everything that I knew and shipped off to a foreign country, literally a foreign country. And this guy, I don't know who it was, obviously, on a motorcycle kind of went past us, not zipped past us on the Autobahn, but kind of, overtook
Just
us.
carried along. Yeah.
And I remember sitting in the car, looking out the window, wishing I was that guy because then I could go wherever I wanted to. And I don't know if I attached that to the motorcycle or to not being in the car, but that's like the first time I remember looking at a motorcycle and thinking, I wish I could do that.
Sure.
And
That's
then
cool.
it didn't really come back to me until, like every other kid my age, I loved Chips, the TV show
Mm, yeah. Yeah.
Ponch and
Yeah.
John. And that just motorcycles were very cool in that respect. But then as a teenager in high school, my senior year of high school, a friend of mine had somehow managed to get a hold of a motorcycle, and he took me for a ride on it, and that I was hooked. I had to have it, and it was a terrible experience. Don't get me wrong. He was not safe. The motorcycle was not safe.
Right.
We were in the midst of a cicada bloom,
Oh God. Yeah.
and we rode through a cloud of cicadas and
Yeah.
were covered with cicada parts. Uh, but I was wearing a 3/4 helmet that didn't fit. And it was a terrible experience. And I had to absolutely do it again as soon as I possibly could. And I ended up buying that motorcycle from that friend, but I had to keep it at his house because I couldn't tell my mother that I had a motorcycle. And that it never ran on more than 2 of its 3 cylinders. It was a Kawasaki triple.
Yeah. Yeah.
And eventually it just died. And I think so that was probably 86, maybe the spring of 87. And by the end of the summer of 1988, I had a Honda CB750 that actually ran all of
Nice.
its cylinders. It had a disc brake in the front. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but it did have a disc brake in the front. And I rode Hondas for years, especially CB750s. I had, a dozen of them. As
Wow.
a matter of fact, at one point I had a storage space filled with CB750s and CB750 parts just to keep my one bike on the road.
So you had like a bunch of donors, like
Yeah.
donor motorcycles and donor parts and all that. Okay.
Yeah,
That's
and I
dedication.
joined a group called the Vintage Japanese Motorcycle Club, VJMC,
Hmm.
and for a little while I volunteered with them because they always needed help. It was a big organization, and I
Sure.
helped run the classifieds part of the website for a couple of years, and I went to a bunch of their events, and it was just a blast having access to other people that rode. Because I didn't grow up in a motorcycle family other than my uncle. Nobody in my family has ever ridden a motorcycle that I'm aware of. I
Hmm.
didn't, my parents' friends didn't have motorcycles. My friends didn't have motorcycles except for this one guy in high school. And so being part of the VJMC introduced me to motorcycle culture, even though
Sure. Yeah.
it's really just a bunch of nerds, because that was on the internet. Then by the early 90s. And that just, it was bad for my pocketbook, but it was good for my soul.
Sure. Yeah. You found like-minded individuals and you were able to kind of get into the community of motorcycling, which is, I mean, half or sometimes more of the reason that some people get into motorcycling in the first place. So,
Yeah, exactly.
um, what was it about that first time? I mean, despite the ill-fitting helmet and the cicadas that made you want to do it again, what hooked you?
It was literally the air in my face and that feeling of freedom and not being inside a car. It just, and I love to drive, don't get me wrong, but
Sure.
something about being on a motorcycle made me feel connected to what I was doing in a way that driving a car doesn't,
I like
you
it.
know?
Yeah. Yeah, you're more involved. You're one of the things I hear it a lot, but I've noticed it a lot especially when I first started riding is the smells. The fresh cut
Yeah.
grass, the autumn leaves, going through cow country. That was a big
Hmm.
one. Yeah, it's a little more visceral of a feeling, I think, than being behind the wheel of a car.
Yeah. And although I do recommend riding through cow country, I do not recommend riding through cow processing country.
Ooh,
Very different smell, much less pleasant.
yikes. Yeah, that does do not recommend. um, so you were involved with vintage Japanese owners motorcycle club, and then now you're with the BMW MOA,
Hmm.
Motorcycle Owners of America. Tell me about the journey from one to the other. Have you always kind of been involved in different motorcycle communities since that first one?
Really, just the two. I
Okay.
started with the VJMC. In 1999, I was run over by an inattentive old lady driving a
Oh,
car.
geez. Okay.
Yeah, it was not pleasant. It really destroyed my motorcycle. I had to have 3 operations on my left leg. It took me a year to learn how to walk again. I
Jeez.
still walk with a limp today. It's been
Okay.
a long time, 25
Sure.
years.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And but the the year after that, I I had another bike. Actually, I had another bike before I was even off crutches. I used to have to bungee my crutches to the back of my bike to go to work, which my doctor was not impressed when I showed up to a doctor's appointment on my motorcycle.
Oh, that's bold. That's real bold.
Yeah.
You can't even fake it with a car. Like, no, I'm not riding at all. You know.
No, no. After that, I started parking kind of around the corner so he couldn't see me.
Right.
But anyways, so I went on a cross country trip kind of as a celebration of my recovery with a friend of mine, Jason. And we spent a little time in San Francisco. And
Hmm.
while I was in San Francisco, I had an opportunity to ride a BMW. It was a 97 or 98 R 1100 GS.
Okay.
I'd never seen anything like it. I wasn't familiar at the time with BMW motorcycles. It had the cylinders stuck out the side and it had this giant
Yep.
beak on it and it was funny looking. But the guy who owned it, we were at a big party and the guy who owned it had been drinking, so he couldn't ride it home.
Mm.
So they were looking for somebody who was sober to ride his bike and take him home.
Yeah.
Um, so I volunteered. I was a block from where we were staying at my friend Stan's house. And so I went and grabbed my helmet and my gloves and my jacket. And I went back and I got on this guy's bike. He got on behind me. I took him home and rode the bike back to the party because, it was halfway across San Francisco. And he came back and got it the next day. And that's when I kind of went out and looked at it in the daylight and thought, wow, that is the ugliest bike I've ever seen. But it was so easy to ride,
Right.
wide handlebars, low center of gravity, upright seating position. It was super comfortable. It was great on the streets of San Francisco. It had so much torque to
Oh,
go
sure. All
up
the
the
hills and
hills.
everything.
Yeah,
Hmm.
it was fantastic. Um, and when I got home, I basically immediately started looking for a mid 90s R 1100 GS. I found
Sure.
one in South Carolina, met the guy in North Carolina, put it in the back of a pickup truck that I borrowed from a friend and drove it on home. And then that led to, you know, being just like with my CB750, I had joined the VJMC. Once
Hmm.
I had a BMW, I started looking for a BMW club.
Okay. Yeah.
And at the time, the big one around was the MOA, so I joined the MOA. There's a smaller one called the BMW RA. I joined that club as well. And through those being involved in those organizations, I came to find out about my local BMW club,
Mm.
and I just got involved with them, and just stuck with them. And we would do my favorite thing that my local BMW club ever did is this thing called a tech day, where
Okay.
basically
Yeah.
everybody brings their motorcycles over to some dude's house, and we all sit around this guy's garage and his
Right.
driveway and his yard and the street outside, and we all work on our motorcycles. And most of it's routine stuff, oil changes and taking the tank off to get to this, and fix
Sure.
this and fix that, and put a new shock on or something. Um, but that's where I really started to love working on motorcycles, because I did not enjoy working on my CB750. It was a pain in the ass to work on. But
Right.
with the BMW Boxers, so much of it is right there.
Yeah, because it's literally out to the sides. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want to adjust the valves, go right ahead. It's right there under that cover. Just
Yeah.
get the engine to top dead center, pop that cover off, and you're good to go. Um, And so that really kind of got me into the community, and I got involved with the local club as a volunteer and became the local club's magazine editor, newsletter editor.
Sure.
And so when the MOA had a changeover, a turnover in editor for its magazine, which is called BMW Owners News, I basically sent some copies of my local club magazine to the MOA office and said, "Hey, I'd like to apply for that job. I felt like I could do it." And I got a very nice call back from Ted Moyer, who was the assistant executive director at the time,
Mhm.
saying, "Hey, we've already hired a new editor, but how would you like to help out?" And I
It's
said,
cool.
"I would love to help out." And so that was October of 2014, and I've been there ever since.
Yeah. Well, that's impressive, man. I mean, it just from literally from having an interest in motorcycles and joining clubs and then kind of turning your passion into a career, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's one of those things where you know so my background, my educational background is as a historian.
Okay.
um and uh all throughout grad school I spent so much time researching and writing, and while I was doing that I was freelancing as a photojournalist.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I didn't get a lot of jobs because I didn't have a lot of time. um but I got a few jobs. It was enough to make a little bit of money, and that made me happy. But with all of that experience researching and writing and analyzing facts and data from a lot of different sources and putting things together, um, I really enjoyed that aspect of it. And so it really, without thinking about it too deeply, it prepared me for where I am now when I was in my 20s and 30s,
Oh, for sure.
you know, and this is uh, I didn't grow up wanting to be a journalist. That's not something I ever thought I would do, let alone to write exclusively about motorcycles and motorsports.
Sure.
I thought I was going to be a teacher. Wanted to be a college professor, which I actually did for almost 20 years
Okay.
as a
Yeah.
part-time basis. But I thought that was going to be my career. But
Sure.
when you're in college, you got to do something to pay tuition and pay rent and
You
eat food.
still got
And
bills to pay. Yeah.
yeah, so I worked in IT. I worked as a phone support agent for a pretty large regional ISP on the East
Okay.
Coast. And that company got bought, as those companies did, and that I parlayed that into a job elsewhere in the parent organization.
Mhm.
Um, and so I worked in IT for a long, long, long time
Yeah.
until eventually I ended up working as an editor for an IT company.
It's like when your
So
powers combine, man.
yeah, and that was the first time that all kind of came together. And so at the same time, I was teaching part time as well, and then and also, like I was the guy that rode my motorcycle to work in
Okay.
DC area traffic. I was one of those psychopaths commuting around the Beltway every day for a decade plus. And then, yeah, it just all kind of came together. And at one point, the company I worked for got bought. That company then got bought, and that second round of buying, they just cleaned house. They laid off
Right.
everybody,
Yeah.
and the first group they went after was the remote workers, and the company was in New Jersey, and I was in Virginia, so they didn't care. They just cut me
Yep.
loose. Um, so I I got by on freelance contracts for a while, but that
Mhm.
led to some very serious discussions with the MOA about working full time for them, on a salaried basis. And
Sure.
it didn't come together right away. It took several years for that to happen, but that's the direction that I wanted to go. And, along the way, I became a video content producer and a podcaster and all these other things that I never dreamed about,
Yeah.
when I was a kid or in college or anything like that, working on a newspaper. And it amazes me sometimes the things that I get to do in my career.
Yeah.
um I'm so unique, and I don't mean that as a self-aggrandizing thing. I'm not breaking my arm, patting myself on the back, but I actually get paid to make podcasts, and that is
Sure.
such an unusual thing in the podcast world. That's literally part of my everyday job, is to make podcasts.
Yeah.
And I'm so incredibly lucky in that regard. But I'm still also the IT guy. I just yesterday I was on the phone walking a dude through how to access his new email account that I had created for him 5 minutes
Right.
before the phone call. So, I'm still blending my worlds together. But I think also all that experience with computers has created a comfort zone for me when it comes
Hmm.
to technology, where I'm
Oh,
really
sure.
not afraid to jump into something new, and then combine that with my ability to break a motorcycle. I'm not afraid to break stuff. I'll figure it
Right.
out.
Yeah, yeah, because
It's
with the technology, infrastructure, IT, all that kind of stuff, it's you still have that technical kind of investigative mind where you have to problem solve kind of in a chain almost, and that's how motorcycles are kind of the same way. Where okay, well, if X isn't working, it could be A, B, or C. Let's investigate and kind of go kind of that analytical procedural mind. So they probably really go hand in hand more than you'd think.
I like to think they do, but I do still break shit and struggle with it. I broke my podcast website last week,
Oh,
completely
geez. Okay.
shut it down, could not figure out how to get it back. I still haven't gotten it
Yikes.
back 100%. I got it back so that it looks, you can get to the episodes.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it doesn't look right. And so I've got somebody tapped to help me a little bit later this week. Because even with as much experience as I have in the world of technology, uh, WordPress can be a little tough to figure out sometimes, believe it or not.
Sure. Yeah, it's kind of like a blank canvas. You can do everything or nothing with it, and that's about as far as my IT knowledge goes. But I do know a couple of things about podcasts, and so do you, obviously, because you've been able to like you said, get paid to have a podcast. Chasing the Horizon is the name of it, and how do you even kind of get started with it? Where'd the name even come from? I mean, it's kind of obvious, but it's a cool name. So
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm a list maker, and
okay.
when I first got the idea of doing a podcast, I I was a podcast listener.
Hmm.
And I still listen to this. The same podcast that I got started on is a podcast called Marketplace. I think it's published by NPR, and
Oh
it's
yeah.
about the financial, what's going on in the world, especially the United States financially.
Hmm.
um, and I really love the news aspect of it, because I like to learn stuff and I like to know stuff.
Hmm.
So started looking for a motorcycle podcast that enabled me to learn stuff and to know stuff. And I found it difficult to track down one that was doing exactly what I wanted it to, in the way that I wanted
Yeah.
it to.
Sure.
So at some point, I just went, you know what? I bet I can make a podcast, kind of famous
Yeah.
last words.
I was just
But,
gonna say famous last words.
but, the reason I kind of felt very strongly that I could do it in the first place is because, as I'm sure as you do on the wall behind you, you can see I have a guitar on the wall behind me.
You're right.
Along with my introduction to motorcycles as a teenager, I was also introduced to guitars, and I started a band, and I used to love recording my own band.
Sure.
And part of being able to do that is understanding the technology and pulling it all together. So I already felt very comfortable recording things, two
Right.
track,
That makes
multi
sense. Yeah.
track, microphones, none of that stuff intimidated me. So I knew, with my background in recording, I could at least get a halfway decent podcast done from a technical standpoint. So I wasn't intimidated by that.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And then I kind of looked at all the different motorcycle podcasts that were out there, and they seemed to either be, you know, two or three people who knew each other really well and
Hmm.
spent a lot of time talking about their motorcycles and their trips, filled with a lot of inside jokes and kind of you really had to listen over time to make that connection, I
Sure.
felt.
To be a part of it. Yeah.
Right. And then kind of the other side was things like I forget the name of it, but there's a podcast about MotoGP, about motorcycle
Hmm.
racing.
Sure.
And that's just, two guys analyzing a race from beginning to end. And while I liked both of those things, neither one of them was doing it for me completely. And so after
Sure.
a while, I
Yeah.
thought, if I want to listen to the podcast that I want to hear, maybe I should just do it, because maybe I'm not the only one. Maybe there are other people that want to listen to a motorcycle podcast that is information based, analytical to a certain point, but also features people talking to each other and getting to know each other so that you can get to know them and at the same time learn more about motorcycles in the industry and all that kind of stuff. And that's where the idea for the podcast started,
Hmm.
was a news segment looking at what's going on in the motorcycle industry, and then a conversation with somebody who's part of the motorcycle industry in some way, whether it's somebody like you and I who are, I would say just podcasters, but we're certainly part of the support part of the motorcycle industry,
Sure.
where
Yeah.
we help keep people stay involved and we help people get excited about motorcycling. um, but I wanted to talk to I wanted to talk to somebody who had ridden around the world. I wanted to
Right.
talk to somebody who knows how oil is made.
I like
I want to
that. Yeah.
talk to somebody who understands tread patterns on tires. Um, I want to understand all these different aspects of motorcycle and motorcycling. So I started going after people who were experts in those areas of motorcycling and trying to convince them to be on Chasing the Horizon. Um, and the name of it came about. I'm a list maker.
Yeah.
So at one point, I just started making a list of names that I thought would sound cool. Like I was coming up with a band name, is basically the
Oh,
way I
sure. Yeah.
approached it. I've been
Not too
in,
dissimilar. Yeah.
yeah, in a number of bands over the years. And so I had a legal pad, and I would just, anytime I thought of one, I would write it down. And every now and then I'd look at the list and I go, nah, that sucks. And I'd cross it off.
Yep.
And at the end, I got down to about 4 or 5 that I couldn't cross off because they were good.
It just
And
sounded too good. Yeah.
yeah. And then so basically I sat down with my wife and our daughter and I said, you guys pick a name for my podcast out of these 4 that aren't crossed off. And my wife liked Chasing the Horizon, and my daughter said, yeah, that's a great name. And I was like, that's it. That's the name.
Love it. Yeah. So it was a family decision, which makes it all the better.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So you're not really afraid to get into like the technical nitty gritty
Nah.
of stuff on your podcast. Tell me a little bit more about that and what kind of the response has been.
Sure. So I'll give you a great example. A few weeks ago, I read an article about the new advanced rider assistance system that is
Hmm.
being implemented on the 2025 KTM Super Adventure S. And
Okay.
it's the adaptive cruise control.
Oh
It's
wow. Okay.
it's so much cool stuff. It involves, radar sensors and distance and, speeding up and slowing down magically, um, and
Yeah,
all
like
that
what's
kind
in
of
cars
stuff.
nowadays almost.
Yeah, exactly like what's in cars, except on motorcycles. And they got to have an automatic transmission because
Oh,
this
sure.
system will actually bring the motorcycle to a complete stop,
Yikes. Okay.
which is something, right? And that was
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I got to know more about that. And the system was invented by a company called Bosch. So I went to their website and I found their press contact, and I called and left a phone message. And a few days later, they called me back. And I think, you know, I'm not sure they thought I was serious, but I convinced them I was serious. And the lady that I talked to was very, very nice, and she fielded my request. And I actually, this is going to sound really ballsy, Mark. I just asked to talk to the vice president of the two-wheel division.
You don't get anywhere unless you ask.
Yeah, and turns out he's actually in Japan.
Okay.
That's where he's German, but he lives in Japan. That's where his office is. And
Okay.
the press lady that I talked to said getting that timed logistically would be difficult. Would
Mhm.
you mind talking to someone in the United States? Like, absolutely not. Give me whoever
We'll
you got. And
we'll
I
give it
was
a
just
shot,
very,
yeah.
yeah, I tried to be clear with her and explain what I wanted to talk about, what I wanted to learn about, so that she understood that I really did want a technical person. Because a lot of people
Mhm.
don't want a technical person. But
They usually
I
have
was
the
like,
marketing guy or the PR person or whatever, and
exactly. I said,
yeah,
I want an engineer. I want a nerd.
yeah.
I want a dude, a woman, a man or a woman that knows this system, because I want to ask technical questions. And she found me somebody. It took several weeks.
Mhm.
Bosch is a big international company. It took several weeks to work through all of their permissions. I had several phone calls and emails from people in the organization, just kind of double checking to make sure, you know, I understood where the lines were, because even though this system is coming out on KTM's, they wouldn't be able to talk about, I wouldn't be able to ask questions about what else they're working on for KTM or for BMW or for Harley Davidson, because proprietary business stuff, which is something I never had to deal with, until the last few years, asking
Yeah,
people
yeah.
questions that could literally get them in trouble at work.
Yeah,
Um,
it's a little different from going from, like, 70s UJM motorcycles to, cutting edge technology that some people, yeah, sign NDAs about, you know?
yeah. Yeah. So, kind of once I got all that out of the way, um, set up the interview, did it just like this, you and me, except the guy I was talking to, his name is Daniel.
Mhm.
And it was a fantastic conversation. And now I will tell you one thing, Mark, that I think has really helped, um, because it would be difficult, I think, for a lot of people, journalists, podcasters, whatever, to reach out to a company called Bosch,
Yeah.
the Bosch, international conglomerate in motorized technology, and be taken seriously enough to get that first return call.
Mhm.
And I think that's where the connection to BMW comes in a critical fashion, because
Oh,
even
sure.
though the MOA is independent of BMW, we work together with BMW on a lot of different things.
Okay.
So BMW is its own company,
Mhm.
and they, you know, we don't always see eye to eye. We try to, because we love BMW motorcycles, and
Right, of
so do
course.
they. They keep making them. Um, but I think just, having that connection to BMW at least gets me the callback. It may not get me the interview, but it gets me the callback where I can explain things to them.
Sure.
Um, and so that has been a real boon, and I've probably gotten some interviews that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten, especially very early on. Now I'm 100 and the episode where I interviewed you will be episode 158.
Okay, cool.
So I'm pretty deep into it. But when I was, in episode 15 or 18, yeah, I got some no's, you know,
Okay, yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and now the nice thing about having such a history behind me in podcasting is the show is known. in the industry a little bit. I'm known a little
Right.
bit in the industry as somebody that takes what he's doing seriously.
Sure. Yeah.
I like, you're not going to come on Chasing the Horizon and get asked a bunch of stupid questions that have nothing to do with your expertise. Uh,
Right. Right.
Although I do occasionally ask a stupid question.
We all
Um,
do. We all
yeah,
do.
yeah, those exist. For anybody that says there is no such thing as a stupid question, I was a teacher. There are lots of stupid questions.
I can only
Um,
imagine.
but over time, and it's easy to go back and look at the base, the episodes that I've got already, and see that I'm persistent, I'm consistent, I do know what I'm doing, and I think that helps get many more yeses when those interview requests go out. um, and it also helps that a lot of times, I'll be honest, I want to talk to somebody who is trying to sell something.
Okay.
And being on a podcast that goes out to several thousand subscribers and even more casual listeners
Hmm.
it's free advertising. It's
Right.
easy
Yeah.
PR.
You have a platform. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think, there's a little bit of that too. Um, but so far, the only two no's that ever really kind of stuck in my craw
Mm.
were a company that makes something for motorcycles, and that guy basically just, like, he turned me down face to face, and he did it in a really rude way.
Well, that's a bummer.
And I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
tried to I tried to angle, it's, hey, it's free advertising, it's a great way to get, and he just completely shut me down and did it in a
Yeah.
really rude way.
That
Um,
sucks.
and then the other no that I got that kind of still sticks with me a little bit, was from another podcaster. And
Oh, okay.
it was early-ish on, probably 2018 or 2019.
Yeah.
Um, and their show was a lot bigger than mine.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think maybe he just didn't want to talk to somebody who wasn't at his level, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that always, I got my start in the professional world as a guitar teacher. That was
Okay.
my first real job, was teaching guitar lessons.
Hmm.
And everybody that I interacted with wasn't as good of a guitar player as I was. Not that I
Hmm.
was amazing, but I was better than them, and that's all that mattered,
Right.
because I could teach
Hmm.
them stuff. And I think that taught me a little bit of humility, that there's always something you can teach somebody else. But in return, doing that job for 12 years, I also discovered that there's things that I can learn from my students. And I
Oh, of
learned
course. Yeah.
I learned from my students all the time. Even
Hmm.
I had students. My youngest student I ever had was 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
The oldest student I ever had was 90. It was
Oh,
a
geez.
a
Okay. Yeah.
literally a little old lady with an acoustic guitar
Right.
that
Right.
her grandson or great grandson had given her, and she wanted to learn how to play it a little bit because he loved guitar.
Mm, okay.
And I learned something from all of those people. And that, I think that's what still kind of gets me a little bit about that particular no, is that podcast host assumed he had nothing to learn from me, and
I
therefore
gotcha. Sure.
couldn't be bothered, because his
Yeah.
show was already fairly popular.
Right.
So, yeah, that one stung a little bit, but I've moved past it. I'm not bitter about it anymore. Um,
Right. And sometimes you can use that as fuel to move things along and to keep yourself going, you know.
well, yeah, and at that point, kind of my goal became to get to 50 episodes, because that
Yeah.
felt like a real landmark number.
Sure.
Um, and then my next goal was to get to 100 episodes. And now I don't have a goal. I just put out episodes as I come to them, because I'm having fun doing it.
Yeah, I love it. Well, going back to the theme of learning from people, what are some maybe motorcycling or life or just other things, things that you've learned from doing, multiple hundred, almost, multiple hundreds of episodes over the course of the years doing your podcast? Anything stick out in your mind?
I think um, certainly one of the things that I've learned is how similar we all are in our differences, which sounds very meta and kind of new agey. But, one of the things that I like to find out is how people got started in motorcycling. And
Sure. Yeah.
so many of those stories start in a shockingly similar way,
Hmm.
especially based on age groups, right? Especially. So people who are my age or a little bit older, I
Hmm.
hear a lot of, well, my neighbor had a mini bike and, you know, and
Yeah. Yeah.
people
Yeah.
who are in their 20s or maybe their early 30s, I hear a lot of, well, I needed a cheap form of transportation,
Interesting. Okay. Yeah.
that kind of thing. And so I've heard a lot of the same origin story over the years,
Right.
but every single one is unique and every single one is different and every one is informed by the makeup of your family, the makeup of your neighborhood, the where whether you went to, a big college or a small one,
Hmm.
those kinds of things. Just whether you lived in a big city or a farming village in the middle of Iowa, all those things are what create the differences. But it's the motorcycles that brings us all together. And that, I think, more than anything else has inspired me to continue to pursue those stories, whether it's an engineer who understands the intricacies of adaptive cruise control,
Sure.
or it's, some dude who grabbed a camera and a sleeping bag and got on a 250cc dual sport and rode around the world on it.
Yeah.
you know uh,
Yeah.
at a certain level, a motorcycle rider is a motorcycle rider, and we're all in this together. And I think being able to share those stories with each other grows our sense of community, and being able to listen to those stories inspires other people to want to become part of the community.
Yeah, no, I love it. I don't it's not as meta as you think. I mean, we're all no matter how we came at it or what kind of riding we enjoy, we're all motorcycle riders and we all love being on two wheels no matter what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I see, I've been riding now for long enough to see people that I know age out,
Okay,
and
sure.
some people just stop. There's a guy in my local club. We had a breakfast last Sunday, and he was there. He came to breakfast and was having a good time talking to everybody. And when we went around to talk about events and things that were going on, he stood up, he introduced himself, and he said that he was done riding and he was there to hopefully find somebody to sell his bike to,
Wow.
because he wanted somebody to love it as much as he had. And I've seen other people who, as they get older, they go to smaller and smaller bikes,
Oh, sure. Yeah, they
to
kind of
make
go
sure they can,
from up in displacement back down to yeah, in
yeah,
displacement.
to make sure they can still pick them up. To a guy that I was very honored to know named Paul Mahalka, who in his life had so many different connections to motorcycling. He was a championship motorcycle racer in South America,
Oh, wow.
but he made his career in the United States selling motorcycles. That's how I knew him. He was worked at a motorcycle dealership.
Right. Okay.
And he had, unfortunately, terrible cancer, but
Mm,
he rode almost to the end of his life, and he just kept going down, 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 down until he was finally just on a scooter,
sure.
but he could
Yeah.
still
Wow.
ride the pants off of it. And I rode with him once on his scooter and was like, how am I not keeping up with this guy?
Jeez.
you know, because
Yeah.
he was so skilled as a rider. And it was just fantastic to experience that. Um, and so, I think as difficult as it is sometimes to watch your friends stop riding, it's as important an aspect of the experience as your friends when they start riding,
Oh, for sure.
and
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
yeah, and where it's probably a little more poignant right now because over the weekend we lost an icon in the MOA, a woman called Muriel Farrington,
Hmm.
who lived in Vermont and was a long distance rider that would put pretty much everybody to shame. I mean, she rode everywhere, uh, as and always, you know, um,
Yeah.
and so her death is so fresh right now that it's a little hard to have perspective on it.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
she was one of those people that I want everybody in motorcycling to meet because they're welcoming. She wanted everybody to ride, so she was always there with a smile and an encouragement. But she also would criticize if she saw something worth criticizing, you know.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
she always did it in that kind of nice old lady, nice grandma way, you know, which I appreciated because I'm not perfect. I can take a little criticism.
Right. Well, and sometimes that hits harder than somebody coming at you guns blazing too,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I read it when my wife was pregnant with our daughter. I read a book about parenting in Japan,
Oh, okay.
and one of the things that stuck out to me, and I don't know how deep this is in Japanese culture anymore, but at the time the book was written in the mid to late 1990s,
Hmm.
um, one of the parenting methods that the Japanese apparently used was, instead of punishing or grounding, a lot of the things that American kids are used to,
Hmm.
uh, the Japanese parents would just express disappointment.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
Yeah. And one time Muriel called me and said that she was really disappointed with something I had written in one of my columns.
Oh, geez. Okay.
Yeah, and that was my reaction exactly. I was like, "Oh," and I was like, I stopped what I was doing and I paid attention.
Yeah.
And she was absolutely right. I had basically used some terminology that would be off-putting to a certain segment of the club, and I did
Okay.
it kind of as a reflex. I didn't think about it, and
I
that was
got you.
kind of her point. Was when you're
It was on autopilot and
yeah, when you're doing this, you really need to think about it.
right.
Um, and the nice thing about it is I've been able to apply that lesson that she taught me through being a little disappointed to a lot of other aspects of my life.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. No,
still stick my foot in my mouth and make mistakes, but I like to think that I think a lot more before I write.
sure. Well, and that's one of those lessons that I think you can apply kind of everywhere, including motorcycling, is to maybe think a little bit more before you act.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And talking about, you know, m- thinking about motorcycling and thinking before you act maybe a little bit is, you said you took a ride out to California before.
Mhm.
Um, what are some of the favorite trips that maybe you've taken over the course of your riding career?
Well, that is certainly up there in the top five, not just because
Yeah.
of the ride itself, but because I went with my friend Jason. We had a wonderful time. He was at a hard place in his life. I was still recovering from my crash in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Um, one of the things that, this is kind of off topic, but one of the things that I learned as a result of my crash is that PTSD affects more than just veterans. It affects more than just people who are in combat. Um,
Okay.
and that was a lesson that was very difficult for me to learn, and
Mhm.
took a lot of effort and frankly a lot of therapy. But I recognize now that I was suffering from PTSD during that trip,
No way.
and
Okay.
it was much less when I got to the other side of the country, because of how we took our trip and who I was with. And I had an opportunity to talk about a lot of different things with Jason in the evenings and at meal breaks and things like that.
Yeah.
So that trip absolutely stands out in my mind as one of the best I've ever taken. The year after, so during the MOA, every year has a rally, big
Okay.
rally somewhere in the country. I don't actually like to call it a rally. I call it a family reunion, because that's the feeling
Sure.
it has for me.
Right. Right.
Complete with the people you love to see and your drunk uncle that's a little handsy. You know, we run the whole thing, but that's a family reunion. You know what you're getting into.
Right. Right.
So
Right.
we move that all around the country. We have it in a different place almost every year. I mean, we have it every year, in a different place almost every year.
I
We've
got you.
gone
Yeah.
back to a few places, but obviously the big year of all the lockdowns from COVID, we didn't have the rally because it would have
Mhm.
been unsafe to do so. And that year, the rally was supposed to be in the kind of the middle third of Montana.
Okay. Yeah.
So basically, instead of canceling the rally, we just pushed it for a year. So
Sure. Yeah, that makes
instead
sense.
of going to Montana in 2020, we went to Montana in 2021.
Mhm.
And I decided that I was going to ride, you know,
Sure.
because usually when I go to the rally, I'm working.
Right. Yeah. You've
So,
got stuff to do.
5,000 to 6,000 people are coming to the rally to have fun. And a lot of those people, absolutely critical to the success of the event, they come and they volunteer. They help out,
Okay.
you
Yeah.
know, registration, security, first aid, whatever. And we couldn't do it without those people. Absolutely. But the staff, we're there and we work, you know, sun up to sundown, and then a little bit more past that. So a lot of people see the rally as their vacation every year, and that's
Yeah, for sure.
fantastic. But for me, that's not my vacation. So I wanted to, coming out of COVID, it affected everybody differently. But one of the things that affected almost all of us is we weren't really able to travel.
Right.
And
You couldn't go anywhere. Yeah.
yeah, I don't think I realized until that point how important it was for me to go somewhere on my motorcycle a couple times a year, even if it
Mhm.
was just for the weekend or, a few hundred miles away or whatever. But to pack the bike and go and rely on just what's on the bike, and maybe a quick trip to Target if you forget socks, kind of thing.
Right. Right.
So I decided I was going to ride to the rally in Montana, and I wasn't going to haul. I was going to take a whole week and ride to the rally and kind of pace it instead of just burn on the freeway.
Yeah. Just,
So
enjoy your time.
exactly. So I actually rode up the first day. I rode up to Ohio, and my friend Jason, who now lives in Pennsylvania, he rode over and met up with me. Um, and that, ironically, that was the only day in the whole trip that it rained constantly. It
Oh,
rained
really?
that entire day. Um, and so, but luckily my rain gear held out. And so then Jason and I rode to where his parents grew up, in a little town in Wisconsin. So
Yeah.
we kind of went around Chicago, and we spent a couple days up there. And then I went to Minneapolis and spent a couple
Mhm.
of days in Minneapolis, in that area. I wanted to see Paisley Park.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, when I got there, you couldn't get a tour. I didn't know you had to like get a ticket ahead of time, so they were
Okay.
completely
Yeah.
booked. So I couldn't take the tour, but I did pull up in the front real quick and take a picture of my motorcycle with Prince's sign. That
So
was
that's
really
cool.
important to me. Um, and I wanted to see the house where Robert Persig lived at the time
Oh,
that he
sure.
took his trip with
Yep.
his son Chris. That became the inspiration behind Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which is a little bit about motorcycle maintenance, but is not at all about Zen. It's a long story. You have to read the book to understand that.
Yeah.
And then I rode the rest of the way to Montana, and I followed a little bit of Persig's route,
Okay.
not road for road because some of those roads simply don't exist anymore.
Hmm.
But I tried to stick to the spirit of it. You know, he took his trip um, at a time when I think the United States was a lot less hectic,
Sure. Yeah, that
you
makes
know?
sense.
And so I wanted to slow down a little bit. I didn't want to ride on the interstates unless I absolutely had to.
Yeah.
Um, and for the most part, I didn't. The first day when it was raining and I had to go to Ohio, since it was raining anyways, I just got on the interstate and
It's like book
burned
it.
it.
Yeah, whatever. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
And then, so I spent an entire week going to the rally. And I
Hmm.
spent part of that the first couple of days with my friend Jason, which was great to reconnect with him on
Yeah.
motorcycles. Um, I got to see his parents' hometown that I had heard about, you know, for a lot of years when I was a teenager. His parents actually had a big influence on my life.
Okay.
Um, and then I finished the ride to the rally site in Montana, and it was it was so peaceful and it was so wonderful and it was so just kind of you know. Um, and so that part of the trip really stands out in my mind because I got to do the ride that I wanted to do at the pace that I wanted to take it. And then after the rally was over and everybody started going home,
Yeah.
um, I had to go home faster than I got there, and I knew that because
Yeah. Yeah.
you know you gotta work, and in addition to the MOA, I'm also a freelance editor, and I do other work, and one of my contracts was kind of at a high point then, so I really had to get to work
Yeah. You don't
on
pay it
that.
unless you get working. Yeah.
Exactly. But I had never had an opportunity to explore Wyoming.
Okay.
So I took 3 days and I rode as slow as I could around Wyoming.
Yeah.
And I forget the name of the little town that I stayed in at a bed and breakfast that had a little diner across the street. It was fantastic. And then my last night I stayed in Cheyenne,
Oh,
um,
yeah. Okay.
which is just a fantastic city. And I rode around the city for like 2 or 2.5 hours, just
Just exploring. Yeah.
yeah, just looking at, because their houses look different than ours, which is a weird
Yeah.
thing.
That's the
Um,
West, man. It's a whole different world.
yeah. And then so I made my way across Nebraska on the Lincoln Highway, which seemed really appropriate. And I got to Des Moines, Iowa, and I decided I was tired of not being home. And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
I got up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I rode from Des Moines, Iowa to Richmond, Virginia in one sitting. Well, I mean, not literally
Yikes.
one sitting. I had to get off the bike occasionally to go to the bathroom and to get gas, but I did almost 1,200 miles in one stretch with no sleep. Um, because I was done. I was ready to go home. I was ready to, see my wife and sleep in my bed. Most important,
Right.
sleep in my
Right.
bed.
Yeah.
And so that trip, probably that rally trip in 2021, the very slow pace of the first half of it, the just absolute natural wonder of those 2 or 3 days in Wyoming, and then the pound to get home at the end. Um, so that trip sticks out in my mind in so many different ways. So those are probably the two trips that recently that I keep foremost in my mind.
Yeah. No, I love it. I mean, those are both kind of great examples of kind of why people ride in the first place. I mean, it's you don't always get to do kind of the great American road trip, but you hope you do one day. And after you kind of do a long distance ride like that, it's something that definitely does live rent free in your mind. And I've been there too, where it's like, I just want to be home. And especially like if it's like raining, like I just remember a trip back from Wisconsin where it was like, it's Monday. I have to get home. I have to work. It's pouring. I just got to do it. And you just kind of slog. And I don't know, like
Hmm.
you go to a mental place in your head where you just kind of almost, you're singularly focused on just getting to where you need to go. But then to be able to, experience the complete opposite of that, of where it's just like, well, I'm just going to go where I want to. And this road looks interesting, or I can stop and pause for as long as I want and really savor it. I mean, it's kind of the best of both worlds almost, it sounds like.
Yeah, yeah, it really is. And I think that one of my joys in life is knowing that I packed for the trip what I needed,
Oh, sure. Yeah, you're prepared.
and to get to the end of the trip and realize, you know, I didn't forget something, I didn't neglect something, and nowadays, especially as a content creator, I
Mhm.
travel with cameras and computers and charging
Yep.
cables and a whole bunch of other stuff that it's really easy to forget. And but it's also easy to kind of go overboard and take so much stuff with you that you don't have any room to bring anything new back.
Yeah, you can get overloaded, especially with audio visual gear. We'll put it that way.
Yeah, and it's really easy to do that. And I'm one of those people that feels very strongly you've packed too much stuff, put half of it back. You don't need
Right,
that
right.
stuff. But one of the lessons I learned from my buddy Jason when we went on our cross country trip from Virginia to California,
Hmm.
um, I tried to pack in a fashion that required me to do laundry a couple of times on the trip.
Okay.
And he would wear socks and underwear and throw it out. And every once a week, we stopped at Walmart and he would buy new socks and underwear,
Okay.
And at the time, well, I thought, well, that's just ridiculous. That's wasteful. And then, but I get it now because
Okay.
that was his way of enjoying the trip as much as he could in the moment. He didn't want
Sure.
to, because he had just a ratty set of throw over soft bags. He didn't have a lot of storage space on the
Right.
bike, and he didn't have a lot of storage space in his head.
That's
He
fair.
didn't,
That's yeah.
he wasn't in a good place mentally when we started that trip, which meant he didn't really have the capacity for hard planning.
He didn't have the bandwidth. Yeah.
Exactly, the bandwidth. That's the perfect word. So his reaction to that was to just buy socks and underwear as he went,
Yeah.
because that
Just
was
make it.
one
Yeah.
less thing he had to worry about.
Yeah. Make it happen. And just sounds like you said, it'd be able to enjoy not only the trip at your pace, but kind of how you want it too. I think that's an important part of motorcycle touring and travel. And it honestly it's kind of therapeutic to do it that way, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I while I don't travel like that, but I try to think, I have my what would Jason do moments when I'm packing for a motorcycle trip.
Right, right.
Um, and if it's so that kind of led to my philosophy about taking a long motorcycle trip, which is to take half the stuff and if you can, twice the money.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Save up more than you think you need and take half of the stuff that you think you need. And that's helped me a lot on my subsequent motorcycle trips.
Right. Well, I think that tidbit is a perfect way to end. So, Wes, thank you so much for spending some time with us.
I really
We
enjoyed it,
appreciate
Mark.
it. Yeah, thanks. Me too. And let's. Where can people find Chasing the Horizon and BMW MOA and your content?
Sure. So the MOA is online at bmwmoa.org. And you can also find us at bmwownersnews.com. That's where most of my work goes,
Cool.
on that website. And of course, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all those things. If you just search BMW MOA, you're likely to find us. Same thing with Chasing the Horizon. I suggest people search Chasing the Horizon podcast, because then you
Right.
have it gets us at the top. But we're also on the internet, of course, at chasingthehorizon.us, which resolves to an MOA subdomain, which is, nerd stuff. And also, on Facebook and Instagram. I'm not much of a social media maven, so I don't do TikToks or
Sure.
anything like that. It's something that I think about
Right.
because I have to, but I haven't done it yet. So
I
we're
feel you.
pretty stodgy with Facebook and Instagram, and that's about it.
Well, it sounds like pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast or anything, just search BMW MOA or Chasing the Horizon.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. I really
Well,
enjoyed this. I got to be honest with you, it was hard not to ask you questions, right? Because
well, I mean, yeah, the tables are turned on you. I feel you.
yeah, I'm so used to being the person that has to keep the conversation going forward and stay on topic so I was just kept reminding myself, no, don't ask that question. No, don't ask. I already
Right.
had my chance to ask you questions. So
Yeah, and if you want the tables turned back on me, check out Chasing the Horizon, because I was honored to be a guest on your podcast. So thank you again for that, and we'll talk again soon for sure. So thank you, Wes, and it's good having you on.
absolutely. Thanks, Mark.